All materials have a property called density, and in this video I will explain what density is, how to calculate it, and pretty much everything you need to know about it. What is density? That's the question, isn't it? Well, wonder no longer. Density is the amount of mass per unit volume of a material, meaning the amount of matter that is packed into a given area and how much mass that matter has. Matter is made of particles such as atoms or molecules, and all these particles have mass.
Now that you know what density is, you need to know how to calculate a material's density. To calculate density, you need to divide a substance's mass by its volume. The easiest way to remember this is by the simple diagram. The M in the top stands for mass, and when you calculate density, you divide the mass by volume. So the V for volume is below to represent the equation for mass, over volume equals density.
V for density is next to the V because if you are given the density and volume of an object, then you can multiply them together and get its mass. Same for the mass and density, except because the M is above the D, you know that in order to get the volume of an object, if you are given the mass and density, you divide the mass by the density. Density is a material's mass per unit volume, so it makes sense that density is measured in grams per milliliter or grams per centimeter cubed, because mass is measured in grams and volume is measured in milliliters for liquids and centimeters cubes for solids. So density is mass, or grams, per unit volume, or centimeters cubes and milliliters. Example, the density of copper is 8.96 grams per centimeter cubed. This means that 1 cubic centimeter of copper weighs 8.96 grams. To measure the density of a material, you first need to find its volume and its mass. To measure the mass of any substance, you use a triple beam balance. For most solids, you can put them directly on the pane of the balance, but for powders and liquids, you first need to measure the mass of the empty container, then measure the total mass of the container and the liquid, and finally subtract the mass of the container from the total mass to give you the mass of the liquid alone. You need to measure the volume of the substance. To measure the volume of a liquid, you can just put the liquid into a graduated cylinder and record the data in milliliters. To use solids, you measure the volume in centimeters cubed. You use a ruler to measure the width times the height times the length of the cube. In this example, the volume of the cube is 6 centimeters cubed. Measure the volume of an irregularly shaped solid, you need to use the water displacement method. In the water displacement method, you measure the volume. You should fill a graduated cylinder with water and then put the object in and measure the difference between the starting and finishing volumes. The difference is the volume of the object.
Imagine you have a glass of milk like this one, and it has a density of 1.03 grams per milliliter, and you pour half of that into another glass. Is the density still the same? The answer is yes, because the milk is still made of the same material, milk. No matter how much milk there is, it is still milk and it has the same density.
Why do different materials have different densities? Density depends on the mass of particles and the distance between particles. The more mass the particles have, such as atoms or molecules, the greater the density of the material. For example, because density is determined by the mass of particles, since the mass of a gold atom is 7 times the mass of an aluminum atom, gold has a greater density than aluminum. Density of material also depends on the distance between particles. The greater distance between the atoms or molecules, the smaller the density. For example, see these two balloons? One is filled with air and the other with water. Which is the least dense? The correct answer is B, air, because the particles of air are much farther apart than those of water. This table shows that in gases, the particles are much farther apart than in solids or liquids, which is why the density of gases are usually much less than those of liquids and solids. Density is a physical property. A physical property of a material is a property that you can measure without changing the composition of the material or changing it into a different substance. When you measure the density of a material, you measure the material's mass and volume. And when you do this, you don't change the material into a different substance. So density is a physical property.